What if I told you you're part of the last generation that remembers disappearing? Not metaphorically. Literally. No GPS dot tracking you. No text me when you get there. No digital leash tied to your movement. You walked out the door, and for a few hours, you were gone. Just trust, just time. Just the understanding you'd be back before the streetlights turned on. Here's the part no one says out loud. If you were born between the late 70s and mid-80s, you didn't just grow up. You crossed a fault line in history. And that crossing shaped your psychology in ways you probably haven't named yet. You're not fully Gen X, hardened in pure analog independence. You're not fully millennial, raised inside the architecture of the internet. You came of age in the seam between them, and living in a seam changes a person. Because identity usually forms from belonging. A tribe, a generation. A shared cultural story you can point to and say, that's mine. But you've always been slightly out of sync. Too young for Gen X's detachment. Too analog for millennials' digital fluency. So you develop something else instead. Adaptability without attachment. Movement without full identification. You learn to translate between worlds without fully claiming either one. You remember rewinding cassette tapes with a pencil. You also remember creating your first email address and feeling like you had stepped through a portal into the future. Both memories are equally yours. That dual imprint and before and after didn't just give you nostalgia. It shaped how you see risk, how you see time, how you see change itself. You weren't late to the future. You didn't lose the past. You were born at the hinge. And here's where it gets deeper. Before algorithms learned your preferences, boredom was a daily reality. Long afternoons, no streaming, no glowing screen in your palm, no instant escape from silence. Boredom wasn't a failure of stimulation. It was the default setting. So you invented, sticks became swords, sidewalks became racetracks, empty rooms became entire universes. You trained your brain to generate experience from imagination alone. Psychologists now call it the default mode. Network. The mental system that activates when the mind wanders, recombines, creates. For you, that was just Tuesday. You also learned to wait for photos to be developed, for your favorite song to play on the radio, for a friend to show up at the agreed time. Because once you left the house, you were unreachable. Waiting wasn't stressful. It was normal. And inside that waiting, something powerful formed. Delayed gratification. Tolerance for uncertainty. The understanding that not everything arrives on demand. Now pause. What happens to a nervous system trained in patience? When it grows up inside constant notification? That tension you sometimes feel? That low-grade restlessness in an always-on world? It didn't come from nowhere. Your social world was physical and unscripted. Conflict happened face-to-face. Tone mattered. Posture mattered, silence carried meaning. You learned to read a room before you ever read a thread. You learned repair after friction, not escape after discomfort. And you knew solitude, not loneliness. Solitude. Being alone with your thoughts, without a feed replacing reflection. Your mind had space to echo. That childhood, nearly extinct now, gave you something rare. The ability to tolerate stillness without panic, to imagine without input, to exist without being observed. You are among the last adults whose inner life formed in analog silence. And just as you were becoming yourself, the world shifted. Not gradually, not across generations, right in the middle of adolescence. That fragile window where identity is still soft, still forming, still asking, who am I becoming? 1 year, connection meant a phone attached to a wall. A few years later, it meant a glowing portal in the corner of the room, screaming through a 56K modem. You were old enough to remember the before, young enough to master the after. That combination created something rare. Technological bilingualism. You learned analog presence, eye contact, pauses, physical space. Then you learned digital mediation, usernames, typed tone, curated selves. For you, the internet was never the air you breathed. It was a place you visited. You logged on, and you logged off. There was a boundary, clear, architectural, but here's the psychological shift no one warned you about. That boundary dissolved. The place you used to visit became the environment you live inside. Work moved online, friendship moved online, memory moved online, and somewhere along the way, the log-off door disappeared. You still remember when it existed, which means you carry something younger generations don't. The lived memory that reality once had an exit button. And that memory changes how you experience modern life. Identity usually grows from belonging to a shared story. But as a xennial, recognition always felt slightly blurred. Gen X? Not quite. Millennial? Not fully. So you learn to translate instead of inhabit. You recognize both sides of the generational divide. But recognition isn't the same as belonging. And over time, a quiet thought forms. I adapt everywhere. But I originate nowhere. There's strength in that. Cognitive flexibility, empathy across difference, comfort with transition. But there's also a cost, a softer anchor. Fewer cultural mirrors reflecting your exact experience back at you. Now add this. Your childhood unfolded in the stable glow of the 1990s. Cold War ended. Economy expanding. Technology promising progress. The story was simple. Work hard, go to college. The future will be safer and wider than the past. You believed it? Then timing fractured. The dot-com bubble burst just as many of you stepped into adulthood. Then 9/11 hit, not in midlife, but at launch. First jobs. First apartments. First independent plans. The message was immediate. The world can change overnight. Then 2008 landed right as traditional milestones approached. Homes, families. Career consolidation again. The ground shifted. Stacked disruptions. And they shaped you. You carry what could be called cynical optimism. You still believe effort matters. But you also scan for exits. You expect structures to fail. You plan carefully. Because the world didn't change before you were ready. It changed exactly when you stepped forward. Now here's the personal stake. You are raising children in a world you never experienced as a child. They grow up inside networks. Their friendships extend through devices. Their mistakes can persist. Their childhood is partially public. You remember privacy by default. They live in visibility by default. So you parent across eras, trying to preserve boredom, trying to preserve offline space, trying to protect them without isolating them. And beneath that effort lives something rarely named, a quiet grief. Not for your childhood, but for the knowledge that its conditions cannot be recreated intact for them. At work, you stand between operating systems, hierarchy and tenure on one side, speed and iteration on the other. You translate. You mediate. You reframe. Bridges rarely get credit, unless they fail. But you function as connective tissue. By midlife, pressure converges. Aging parents above. Growing children below? Career stability arriving later than expected because of economic shocks. Psychologists call it role strain. But it feels like this. Holding two generations, while still becoming yourself. And here's the curiosity gap no one talks about. What happens when the last generation that remembers off forgets how to protect it? You carry cultural memory, proof that attention once had margins, proof that boredom once built imagination, proof that identity once formed without an audience. You are not invisible. You are continuity. And in a hyper-digital age, continuity is power. So here's the question that matters. What's one analog memory you still carry? Vividly, something no algorithm could ever replicate? Share it. Because mapping the last unconnected childhood might be more important than we realize. And if this hit deeper than you expected, stay. We're not just talking about generations here. We're talking about what it means to remain human inside a world that never turns off.